You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by the National Association of Convenience Stores.
Hey everybody, welcome to Convenience Matters. My name is John Eichberger with NACS and the Fuels Institute, and I'm joined here by my co-host.
This is Donovan Woods from the Fuels Institute, Director of Operations. Good to be here, John.
Hey Donovan, you know, this program is designed to talk about everything convenience, everything about fuel retailing, convenience fuel retailing industry. 160 million people go into convenience stores every single day. That's half the United States. What a lot of people don't understand, though, is the convenience stores sell 80% of the gasoline in the country. And that actually comes down to almost 40 million transactions every single day. Wow. And what's really important to our listeners out there is that we pay attention to what we do with that gasoline before we even sell it. Make sure that it stays contained. And we're joined today here by the Environmental Protection Agency, the Office of Underground Storage Tanks. We got the Director, Carolyn Hoskinson, and the Deputy Director, Mark Barolo. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about the tanks program.
We are so happy to be here. Thanks for inviting us.
You know, it's funny, a lot of people may be out there going, wait a second, we're talking to EPA. But, you know, we've had a great relationship over the 15 years we've been working together. And I'll tell the listeners, you know, there is no organization within the government that seems to be more interested in working with the regulated community than you guys. I really appreciate how you guys always have an open door and really try to incorporate what's going on in the industry when you guys are forming your regulations.
Well, this is a great opportunity to be on your podcast because we don't get to interact with individual retailers as often as we would like to. So I'm so glad to be a part of this today.
Yeah, thank you guys. You know, we want to start off just recently. You guys released a new report. We've been talking to retailers for 2, 3, 4 years now.
Correct.
About it seems that we're seeing a lot more corrosion in diesel storage tanks. And it seems to have really taken off in the last couple of years. At first it was spotty, here or there, random reports, but recently it's kind of gained traction. And you guys did some research recently and issued a report. What did you guys find in your report? What were you guys thinking about?
So what we were hoping we'd be able to find is a really concrete understanding of exactly why we were seeing corrosion in these diesel tanks. We were hoping that if we could find the exact reason why this was happening, we could work with folks to find solutions. Unfortunately, we didn't find enough concrete information to really point our fingers at exactly what's causing the corrosion. But the really shocking part to me was that at 83% of the facilities that we went to, we found significant corrosion, and only 25% of those owners knew they had a corrosion problem. So to me, that was the really important part, to get the news out there that if at the small sample size of sites that we looked at, we saw that big disconnect between the number of facilities that were experiencing corrosion and the owners that knew about it, that's probably all over everyone who has diesel. I'm really concerned that they make sure they find out if they're experiencing these corrosion issues.
How can they find out? Because I've heard people report they see coffee grounds when they pull their ATGs. It actually looks like it could be a brand new ATG. 6 months looks like it's 20 years old.
Exactly.
What should they be looking out for?
Well, there's a few things they can do visually. So what you're talking about is coffee grounds in the filter inside the dispenser. So that's a giveaway. That coffee grounds is really just this corrosion product. So that shows that the various metal components are corroding, and that's the result of it. You can also sometimes see it visually looking down the fill pipe. You can actually see it on the inside of the fill pipe. Not always. But if you see either of those, then you know for sure that you have a problem. What came out of this report for us was really a recommendation that to make sure people are aware that this is happening most of the time, and even if they don't think it's happening at their site, it very likely is, and that we're suggesting that they reach out to their petroleum service contractor to actually come in and take a look, and they can do things a little bit more invasively to take a closer look inside the tank to really determine whether they're having a problem. But if you can see some of those more obvious things ahead of time, you don't even need to go that step to verify it. You know it's happening, and then you can act on it.
Now, you guys aren't the first ones to do a study on this. I know NACS has been involved in 2 or 3 studies looking at it. I think CRC is looking at something as well. It's not uncommon. I was actually in South America earlier and talked to retailers in Brazil and Argentina. They're experiencing similar corrosion problems. We don't know what's causing it, do we?
The studies that have been done to date have not been able to pinpoint precisely the reason it's happening, sort of the root cause of it. But I think there's a general sense and that even came out of the study that we did, that microbiologically influenced corrosion is what's doing the actual corrosion. Why is that happening now? There are theories, but there's no definitive proof. We couldn't say definitively from the study exactly why that corrosion is happening with those microbes, but it is those microbes and the waste products that they create that's actually doing the corrosion. So even while there's continued research into determining sort of the exact root cause of why these microbes are now thriving and creating that corrosion, there are steps that can be done to deal with that and should be done to deal with the corrosion.
So there are two things that I was hoping I could say here, and that is, of course, we all know diesel's been around for a long time. So why recently are we seeing these corrosion issues? And I think that's where we were hoping to get more information, and we're now hoping that CRC is going to be able to get even more information, because there are so many things that are changing in the fuel industry that we couldn't pinpoint exactly what change made us now see corrosion when we weren't seeing corrosion in the past. But the second thing I'm going to mention is we in no way want to indicate that it's any particular sector of the industry that's to blame for this situation. But if I were a tank owner and I had a very significant investment in my equipment, I would want to make sure that my equipment was not going to corrode to the point where it was going to stop working. Or, God forbid, have a release. And then I have a really big, expensive problem on my hands. So our hope is for people to see if they have the issue, hopefully catch it soon while it's a lot easier to address, at the same time that all of us across the industry are working together to find long-term solutions.
I think everyone always cares about the environment. We want things to be nice for our children, for the next generation, but money talks a lot more. And you mentioned fines or penalties or costs. What does that look like if you were talking to a retailer and you say, this is what could happen? What does that look like for them? And does that blame lie on them or who actually made the tank?
Right. So what I keep saying to people is, just because you're having a corrosion issue does not mean that you violated any of our requirements. You could be in absolute compliance with our federal regulations, with your state regulations, and still have corrosion happening. So if you're complying with the regulations, there's no fine that we're going to give you. You're in compliance. Your corrosion is happening for some reason, but it's not a non-compliance reason. So the cost is really going to be if the corrosion gets extensive enough that your equipment stops working, then you need that equipment, and you're going to need to invest the money it takes to get new equipment if it gets that far before you've discovered it. So that's why we think finding it sooner is going to be much more manageable instead of finding it after it's completely failed.
Well, and to Donovan's point, if you don't take care of it early enough, you could have a release in violation of regulations, and you have a cleanup cost and compliance cost and all those things that go with that if you don't catch it soon enough.
Absolutely.
If it corrodes the equipment to the point where the equipment is no longer serving its function of preventing or detecting a release, then you actually would have to make that modification in order to get your equipment operating properly again. And again, worst case scenario, if there's a release, and ultimately the release is the responsibility of the owner of the tank.
So in the absence of knowing definitively what caused it, quite frankly, at this point, that's almost irrelevant. Obviously, we want to prevent it long term, but right now, what do tank owners need to do if they discover they're seeing some evidence of corrosion? What do you recommend they do, and what do you recommend they do to try to prevent it before it happens?
One of the great things about being here at the NACS conference is how many vendors there are out there who are trying to find these solutions, trying to find ways to test for this, trying to find ways to prevent it and ways to fix it. So I've spent my time walking around talking to people who are doing some really interesting things. There's a lot of options out there about what kind of tests you can do, how you can clean your fuel, how you can clean your tank. Far be it from me to recommend which one of those choices somebody makes. But really what I'm recommending is do something to find out what's happening. We got the best information probably that we had. Well, some of the really good information that we had came from cameras that went inside the tanks, and we could see the corrosion on the camera. One of the hardest things about regulating underground equipment is that I can't go look at it. So those cameras really helped us a lot, and those really opened our eyes to what was happening inside the tanks that we couldn't see.
And I think as there's continued research to try to find, again, the root cause and maybe the best solution, the short-term recommendation is to manage your tank as best you can. And one important piece of that is keeping water out of the tank as much as we can. And in the recommendations that we sent out, we have links to a number of industry documents. A number of folks have put together really good papers on sort of best practices on how to properly manage your tank to minimize the water that's inside your tank. It's an ongoing challenge, and there is an effort and expense to it, but it's always been an important part of owning and managing underground storage tanks. But I think now with this enhanced corrosion inside the diesel tanks, it's even more important.
And one of the fundamental basis of the tanks program has always been our partnership with our industry partners, and industry standards is a big part of that. So we highly recommend that people look for the industry standards that recommend how to address water in your tank and these other issues. And there are some great resources out there.
And I think that is a good transition. Last summer, the agency released a significant revision to the regulations, an update to the regulations. You guys spent several years working with the stakeholder community to get those regulations ready for release. And from NAC's perspective, always had an open door dialogue with you guys. And I think from the initial draft until the final regs, I think there are a lot of improvements made to it. From that process, you guys referred to a lot of industry standards. What do you think the biggest takeaways from that rulemaking that retailers and tank owners should pay attention to? What are the big takeaways from that? Because it was a pretty big piece of regulation that I guarantee you most retailers haven't read through themselves.
Exactly.
What are the big takeaways they should keep in mind?
So I think one of the biggest takeaways for us was that we had, in the original regulations, required people to have leak detection, to have things, have equipment in place. But we didn't require people to test it to make sure it was actually working properly. So we really focused in the update to the regulations on proper operation and maintenance of that equipment. So you have the equipment, now let's make sure it's working. So those were really the big changes to the regulations. Of course, because this is a state implemented program, I always have to remind people that what the federal regulations say doesn't often matter to an individual tank owner. It really matters what the state regulations say. We have something called state program approval, and about 40 of our states currently have state program approval. And in that case, the state regulations are the only regulations that tank owners in that state need to worry about. In the rest of the states that don't have state program approval, they actually are subject to both the federal regulations and the state regulations. So all of the states at this point, we believe, are looking at the federal regulations and looking to update their state regulations to adopt a lot of the new requirements that we put in place in the federal regulations. So an individual retailer is going to see their state changing their state regulations and needs to keep an eye on when that's coming out. What does the state end up requiring? States can always be more stringent than the federal government in our program. So even if we tell you what the federal requirements have, the state requirements are going to be very important to watch.
Right.
So my mind is a little boggled there, because if you own this equipment, you've already got a lot going on. This is a new problem that's happening. People may think of the EPA or anything with the government as someone that's coming to put the hammer to them. How can you make them feel as though you want to work with them? And how can they keep up with all these changes or announcements? Is there an easy way to do that?
Well, I guess two different aspects to that. I think John touched on a minute or so ago about the relationship we had while we were working through the regulations, and it really was a collaborative process between EPA and the state and tribal partners, and in the regulated community, and the service providers, and the manufacturers. The process of going through the regulations on identifying what is the right thing to do was so well informed by the experiences in the field of those of you who have been doing that, and we think the final regulations reflect that, and a lot of what they reflect is sort of the evolution of the industry standard. Now there are always going to be those who are sort of in the forefront, right, and others who are lag behind, and I think a lot of what the regulations have done is sort of raise the floor, so that everyone has to do at least a certain level, which a lot of the folks have been doing anyway. A lot of the recommendations have already been there. A lot of the companies have already been doing that. In terms of finding out what the requirements are, I know all the states go through similar processes when they modify their regulations, and there's a lot of good dialogue and exchange at the state level as well while they're modifying their regulations. We attempt to serve as a little bit of a clearinghouse with our website to help direct people to those individual state requirements and individual state contacts, and so that's part of what we do to try to make make it easier for those who are operating in different states to figure out exactly what's happening in the state that affects them.
And we worked hard to put a lot of information on our website that would help people understand the new regulations. So those who are familiar with the tanks program will remember a document called Must for Us. That's basically a readable version of what the regulations require people to do. So we updated that with the new requirements. So we have a new Must for Us. We have a checklist on compliance deadlines. When do I have to start doing this? When do I have to start doing that? And I'm constantly asking people, what else can we put together that's gonna help you understand these new requirements? And whenever we get a suggestion, we try to put that information up on our website and make it available to folks.
Okay, since you mentioned it, what is the website that they should go to check these things out?
It's super easy to remember. It's epa.gov/UST.
/UST for underground storage tanks.
Exactly.
And so they can contact you guys as well.
And my phone number is up on the website, my email address, and Mark's as well. So.
Okay, so final question. If you guys say, imagine we have 50,000 tank owners listening, which someday we will. What would you want to communicate with them about their tanks, about the program, about your office?
So I think what I would say is sometimes we don't see the effects of the underground equipment because we can't see it. But if you have a release, we have cleanups that are costing in the millions of dollars. So really operating and maintaining your equipment properly is going to help your personal investment in your business. It's going to keep you operating and not have to shut down if nobody wants to shut down if they have a problem. So paying attention is really important to your business. But we also want to hear what the challenges are, what the struggles are. We always encourage people to reach out to us, and we really want to know how this program is working on the ground so we can continue to support you in what you're trying to do.
And for the listeners and Donovan, I'll attest to that. Look, this is not, hey, give us a call so we can launch an enforcement action against you.
Right.
This is not, if you call us and say, I have a question, that you are raising a red flag saying, hey, everybody, I've got a problem, come inspect me. You guys really do want to hear from the regulated community so you can help achieve compliance, help prevent releases, and if the regulations need to be adjusted, understand how. Is that correct?
It is. And, we know that a lot of these gas stations, a lot of your listeners have a lot of things to worry about, right? Especially if you have a convenience store, you have food safety issues, you have credit card issues, you have, did my employees arrive for work today? You have weights and measures, and you have underground storage tanks, and I could probably go on with another laundry list of things. So we know that. We know there are a lot of things to keep track of in running this business, and we want to support you however we can.
So you've said it's hard because we can't see them. Let's close on this. Out of sight should not mean out of mind. Exactly. Pay attention.
Very good.
Thank you guys, Carolyn, Mark, for joining us. And thank you guys, everybody, for listening to Convenience Matters. And we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. For more information about the National Association of Convenience Stores, go to nacsonline.com.